Okay, so here we go. This is fun, kind of picking up on this. Pastor Jeff started this, and Pastor Happy digging into some of the aspects of what the church looks like and how we are to behave and what, those kinds of things that God, the expectations of God in terms of entrustment. And so let me highlight something before I start digging into Scripture, because this is something we haven't been able to share in a long, long time. Beginning in just, 8 weeks or so, we're going to resume some short-term trips, global trips, and I'm excited about that. It's been a couple years without those, so this is fun. We've got a medical team, and so this is both the call for participation and the call for prayer as we assemble. So Chase, who's an emergency physician assistant in one of the local hospitals, he leads the team with a number of other providers. So if you're a provider, a doc, a nurse, whatever area that you work in and you would like to participate, but listen very carefully, you don't have to be a provider. This team needs folks to just care and love for people as they take the medical trailer around from village to village in the Yucatan area of Mexico to just help with kids sometimes, help as mom goes in or dad goes in to be looked at by someone who provides medical care. Those folks that are there to just engage the little ones. That's also a beautiful blessing. Imagine what we're going through in our country, in our situation, in our standards, with all this going on, and then imagine what they've got going on now. So what a beautiful way. So if you're interested, let us know. Contact someone at one of the welcome centers, or send an email to anyone you know here, and we'll put you in touch with the right leaders. And then they're pulling the team together now, and they head out on March 5th for 1 week. And it's always been a great blessing. It'll be fun to share stories when they get back. So if you'd like to participate, that'd be great. Step up to that. All right. Well, here we go. It's the Unstoppable Church. And I want to spend 2 more weeks here before we start a new series, which is in the book of Philippians. I love walking through entire books of the Bible. I feel like God gave it to us that way. He just didn't give us a bunch of little phrases here and there. These books are written by men, prophets at times, and so with a message to them. And so the continuity of reading the whole letter, like a letter to the church at Philippi, Paul writes. I love the message there. So we're going to start that in a couple weeks. But I wanted to finish out the series called The Unstoppable Church with some intent with regard to an assessment, right? When we talk about the church, we use phrases like unstoppable, and it is. What is the church? It is the people of God, right? The people in whom God dwells. If you have the Spirit of Christ in you, you are His church. It's a body, it's a group of people called out. And we say unstoppable because that's how Jesus speaks of it. I mean, at the closing words in Matthew's gospel, he says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And then we get that beautiful Great Commission. As you go, make disciples. You baptize them and you teach them. Baptizing, you reach them with the gospel of Christ and you teach them to obey everything that I've commanded you. That's kind of that middle chunk. But let me go back to what he opens with. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And then he ends with this phrase, and I am with you to the end of the age. Now, if you are moving with an individual in whom all authority in heaven and earth has been given, you are unstoppable. If you're moving with him and doing his thing. And that's the way he explains it to Peter in Matthew 16, verse 18. On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Unstoppable. So now listen carefully. We've walked through a couple weeks of just the fundamentals of who is the church, what is the church, what are we called to. But I remember when I first came to Christ, one of the most influential things on my life as trying to figure out what I was supposed to do and how I was supposed to do it was the idea of an assessment. That God calls His church, Christ calls His church, and at the end of time, He will assess her work. He will assess her performance. I mean, you work, you live your life, you move, and you get to the end of your days, whether He calls you home individually or whether He comes to collect us en masse, if you will. He will make an assessment. That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense, and you, because you always want to ask yourself, did I live my life well? Did I do what He would have me to be doing? Those are good questions. Ones that seem maybe at times difficult to answer, but don't shy away from asking the question. It's a good question. Were you doing the things that He gave you to do? And while there might be 110,000 opinions on whether that answer is yes or no, good or bad, well done, not so well done, only one opinion counts. Only one, which kind of simplifies it a bit. I mean, in the end, I really don't care whether you think I live my life well. I said that to several people this past year. I care whether He feels like I lived my life well. We work, we move, we perform, if you will, for an audience of one. One. And that's the one who will make the assessment. I'm grateful it won't be you assessing me at the end. And you're grateful that it won't be me assessing you, though I will have a few things to say. We should all be grateful that it is Him who will be making the assessment of us. And so early on in my career, this was in engineering and research and doing things like this. Everybody has to manage some kind of thing or another. We all had to take these courses called leadership training and this and that, and how to manage a project. And we were all assigned Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's a principle in there that's worthy to remember. It applies to all of life. It applies to everything you put your hand to, or you should think this through in the context of what you do and how you do it. Principle number 2 was this, which is awesome. It's biblical. Begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. I mean, there's nothing when you put your hand to a piece of paper and you're going to draw and you wonder, what do I want in the end? I better work this into it. I better make sure it's going to work. God would use that same principle for us to evaluate the assessment that He's going to bring to bear on our lives. Begin, move, today, tomorrow. What are you going to do next week? Where are you going? How are you going there? I'm not talking about necessary travel or something. But are you moving with an end in mind? Because as the unstoppable church, the old adage applies, if you aim for nothing, you're sure to hit it. Every time, guaranteed. What were you aiming for? Nothing. Bullseye. Listen, its corollary is close too. Aim for anything and you're sure to hit it. What were you aiming for? Anything. You got it. The church of Jesus Christ that moves in Him and with Him and is unstoppable aims carefully. Aims for an end in mind. We move through this course and He will assess us. I love that. Meaning it won't be wasted. He's going to make an assessment. And so you don't aim for nothing and you don't aim for anything. You aim for that which He's going to say, nailed it. Good job. These kinds of passages are critical to you, the church. And they're critical to you even if you're not the church, because He has the job, which is His by right, of making an assessment on His own and those who are not. Now join me in Matthew chapter 25, and I'll get the context quickly. This passage and the one I want to talk about next week is the assessment. What does it look like in the end? What will he say? Are you aiming for something? I mean, if these thoughts don't change the way you apply for a job, the way you seek out a marriage partner, the way you live your life, what you do when no one's looking, what you say, how you say it. These all affect such things. And so he teaches us this way, because in the end, he's going to ask. It's his right to ask. He designed it to ask. Matthew 25 is, here's expositional excellence, comes right after Matthew 24. See, you're going to learn something today, no matter what. Matthew 24 is the end. Matthew 25 is on the heels of the end. And it's where you find these great assessment passages. Matthew 24 is what's often referred to as the Olivet Discourse. Jesus is sitting on the Mount of Olives, 24 verse 3, and his disciples ask him, when are all these things going to take place, and what's the end of the age going to be like? And he tells them, Matthew 24. And when he gets to the close of Matthew 24, he begins to point to what happens after that, the assessment. What was well done, what was not well done. So you see the return of the Son. You see that in the midst of Matthew 24, even verse 27 is the second coming. Verse 36, listen, don't worry about when. Your job isn't when. Your job is to be moving in such a way that the assessment is good. Don't worry about when. Don't worry about when. Could be tomorrow. Could be before I'm finished up here. That would be awesome. Though I did spend a lot of time studying. Lesson number 1 in heaven, you got to stay where you're at, and I'm going to finish this. He returns. Now the assessment, which he begins at the end of 24 with verse 45. That's next week. Those are the specifics. I don't even want to look at that. I want to look at the more general, generic assessment today. Verse 45 and 24. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? That's the question. Who did it well? Who is he going to look at and say, that's wisdom and that's faith? You lived your life in such a way that the assessment is wisdom, faith. Who is that? Next week. Matthew 25 begins with that same kind of push. Now, what does that look like? Faith and wisdom, we'll look at next week. But now the post-game analysis of sorts. Now, and he gives it to us in the context of the master's assessment comes in these 2 parables and a story. And I want to look at the second parable. Parables have usually one main teaching point. These are, were you ready? And what counts? Were you ready? Parable number 1. And what counts? Parable number 2. And then the sheep and the goats, that's not a parable. That's a comparison. In the end, when the king is here, he'll divide. To the left, to the right. So, parable number 1, it starts like this. Here's the key points, because we got to drag them into number 2, verse 1 and 2. Then the Son says, the God of the universe says, this is Jesus speaking. He's the one making the assessment. So this is good to listen to it from his mouth. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like. Now that's critical to the interpretation. Then, when? In the end. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. And then he gives you a couple parables. Parable 1, these 10 virgins, these 10 maidens. And 5 are ready for him, and 5 are not. It is a parable of readiness. Remember that game you used to play when you were a kid? Maybe you still play this with your kids, or you're going to soon play it with your grandkids. I don't know. Hide and seek, right? Everybody loves hide and seek. Everybody plays hide and seek, right? I mean, come on, seriously? You count, everybody scatters, they go hide somewhere, you're counting. You don't have to count loud. I'm not sure exactly what we counted to. But one thing you have to say loud is just before and when you're done counting, you say, ready or not, here I come. And you're supposed to say it loud enough so that everybody hiding knows you're searching. You ready for Jesus? His parables and his coming sounds like this. Ready or not, I'm here. That's exactly what it sounds like. He's already told you he's coming. Now when he shows up, ready or not, I'm here. And the 10 virgins, and 5 are ready, and 5 are not, and 5 go and attempt to get ready, and the door opens and the door closed, and that parable shows you do not get in. The 5 show up too late. They were not ready. The doors close. Please let us into the banquet, to the wedding feast. And a voice from the inside says, no. Ready or not, I'm here. Here's the parable. Be ready. Parable number 2, the assessment. And we'll move so quickly. I want to tease your thoughts and challenge you a bit. This is the church. Well, let's apply this to the church. Whether Jesus has the church in mind exactly in the midst of the beginning of verse 14. The header in the Bible says the parable of talents. I wish it didn't. I wish it said the parable of the 3 servants. We had the parable of the 10 virgins. This is the parable of the 3 servants, or the 3 stewards. A steward is one who's entrusted with something that is not theirs. That's a steward. This is the parable of the 3 stewards. But we call it the parable of the talents, if you will. And verse 14, and I say, I don't know if this is the church in mind, but the principles here in the midst of this parable are stellar. Apply them. It's rich, it's thick, it will change what you do because you begin with the end in mind. And pay close attention to these individuals. It's me and you and all of us. And so he begins in verse 14, for it will be like a man going on a journey. Now listen, for it will be like. Go back to verse 1. That's what he's saying here. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like. And then the parable, for it will be like. It's the same thing. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. And so now he launches into this. For it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. Now that's how he begins here. He starts this way so that you know the setting. This one is identified as a man, but we're going to get down to verse 18 quickly. And this man is a master, their master. So immediately in your mind, understand it's not just a man going on a journey. This is a master going on a journey. This is the master going on a journey. Welcome to our moment in time. It will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. Point number 1, if you're going to understand the interpretation of this parable, is he's the master. Those men are his. They understood what a bondservant was. Some of them were indentured servants working off a debt, and he owned their time. In essence, he owned them for this time. Others of them were, in that culture, they were slaves, bondservants. He owned them. I don't know what you do with that. Don't discount the teaching here. That is indeed the culture. The stuff was his. The men were his. The master gives them his stuff. This is a master-steward relationship. This is a master-servant, owner-steward relationship. They are his, and he gives them his stuff. Now, point 1, and that's how we think of God, right? How often we reflect on this in Scripture. For by him, now Paul speaking of Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible, invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities. All things were created through him and for him. It's all his. All things are his. They're all his. But be careful, because Christians get lost in this myth sometimes. We make passionate arguments about the fact that it's all His, and yet we don't catch the for Him. Through Him, for Him. Why are you here? I am here for Him. Why were these men there? For Him. Literally, in that culture, His. Guess what, church? His. His. By Him and for Him. He's got a purpose in mind. Now notice when he goes on his journey, he starts to entrust things, right? And we teach this to ourselves as the church. Paul speaks that way when he's looking this way. For he who was called in the Lord as a bondservant is a freedman of the Lord. If you were a slave when Jesus called you, you're now considered free in Him. Likewise, he who was free when he's called is a bondservant of Christ. If you were free and Jesus calls you, now you're His servant. It doesn't matter whether you were free or whether you were a slave. When Jesus calls you, you're His. Your status in the world is not all that relevant anymore when it comes to the assessment. You were bought with a price. Do not become bondservants of men. It was a high price. High. I can't even begin to describe it, and neither can you. You were bought. That's biblical. I'm His. He'll ask me in the end. He's got the right to ask me. I want Him to ask me. I'm His. You're His if you're the church. He'll ask you. Because He's going to ask these guys. To the one He gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability, and then He went away. See how he launches into this so quickly? He's got 3 servants, and he starts doling out his property, which has already been clarified. Now, the important thing here that you understand, as he begins to dole out his property, he doesn't take it with him. He was the master. This stuff was his. These men were his. On his journey, he could have taken them with him if he wanted to, and he could have taken all his money with him if he wanted to. A talent was a sum of money, a huge sum of money. Actually, it was a weight of a precious metal, a talent of gold, a talent of silver. If you want to bookkeep it in your mind, it's about 20 to 25 years of your annual salary. You got a number? For some of you, that's still not a big number. Sorry. For some of you, that's a massive number. It's 20 years of your work plus. It's a lot of money. And it's not theirs. It's His. And they're His. Now the key is here, all get something, and they all get different amounts of it. But all get something. It's different. God doesn't dole out the same. He passes to one 5, He gives to another 2, and He gives to another 1. It's the master's property. It's the master's entrustment. It's the same kind of way He works in the midst of the church. This is such a good comparison. Paul writing to the church at Corinth. Chapter 12. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. A variety of service, but the same Lord. There are varieties of activities, but it's the same God who empowers them all in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. He gave you, He is your gift. There's not one of you who is part of the church who doesn't have a gift. He gave it to you. It's Him, actually. This isn't a parable about money. This is a parable about an entrustment. So He entrusts them, and they start moving. And it's different for all of them, and they move. He who had received the 5 talents went at once. You should hear urgency. No messing around. At once. And he traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. And he also, who had the 2 talents, made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground, and he hid his master's money. So now the work begins. Well, the work begins for 2 of them, and the 3rd servant decided he was going to hide it. When you hide something, you're the only one who knows where it is. The intent of hiding it is that. You dig a hole, you put it there, it's hidden. The word hidden is used. He hid it. He dug a hole, hid it. It wasn't his, but he hid it anyway. Okay. And they get at it, right? They start moving, and it's quick. This is an assessment of their work, how they moved, what they did, how they worked the entrustment, what was given that way. Every time we review grace and that God saved us and He purchased us with the blood of His Son, which we will remember at the end of this service with communion. Always remember it had intent behind it for you to be doing something while He was gone. Don't mix grace with work. I mean, one of the most beautiful passages, right? Ephesians 2, 8 through 10. For it is by grace, an unmerited gift, that you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourselves. It's a gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. There's the cross. God saved me. That's it. That's it. I turn from my ways. That's it. That's it. You can't add work to grace. But after grace, there's God's grand expectation of work. Always. Look at the next thing out of Paul's mouth. For we are God's workmanship, His handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. He knew what I was going to do, how I was going to do it. He made it ahead of time. He's got stuff laid out for you. Grace, then work. Grace compels work. You can't add to grace. You simply respond to it. And that's what they do here. The entrustment, and they begin to work it well, except for one of them, right? So now the assessment. And I'll move quickly because I want to save the particulars for next week, because the last guy is the one that really catches our attention. I think that was designed that way. Now, after a long time, how in the world? I mean, what is he waiting for? Are you ready for him to come back or not? I mean, how long is this going to be? A long time. It always seems long. It has seemed long always. But brace yourself. Ready or not, I'm here. That's this verse. After a long time, the master of those servants came, and he settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I have made 5 talents more. And his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. See, that's the thing you want to catch here. What he says of them, we get caught on that well done. But be careful, good and faithful. This is a servant. This is a parable about servants and a master. Good and faithful. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, and I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also who had the 2 talents, he came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have made 2 talents more. Evidence of his working of it. And his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Well done. Man, that's the term. We don't know exactly what they did. We only know that they worked it. They were given an entrustment, and they worked it. God gave you of Himself. Work it. Work Him. He didn't take you home after grace came to you. Why? I had someone ask me that in a class once, years and years ago. Well, I don't want to stay here. I just want to go to heaven. I get that. But it's as if you're telling God He doesn't know what He's doing. Why? He's got something for you to do. There's an assessment that we look forward to. And there was an obvious expectation in the leaving. He gave them his property, and then he comes and he checks on it. Good and faithful. Good. They did what was right. In whose eyes? His eyes. Figure out a definition of good. And your definition may not match mine, but ours better match his. good, faithful. That's the word believe. You were a servant who believed. You believed who I was, you believed who you were, and you believed I was coming back. Faithful. Faithful. Good. Faithful. Wow, we could spend so much time here, but understand this, when Jesus teaches, he always says, I'm coming back. The Son of Man, Jesus says, is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. At the end of Revelation, behold, I'm coming soon, bringing my recompense with me to repay each one for what he has done. Man, we're going to high-five each other at that time. Wouldn't that be cool? What are you bringing? This is the party. What are you bringing? I gave him my vocation. And I'm not talking about working at a church. You're supposed to give him your vocation too. Whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Put your hand to it. What are you going to bring? What are you bringing to the party? Notice that the reward is identical for those two. I mean, the one guy had more than twice as much. One guy hauls in 10, the other guy brings 4, and the reward is the same. Quit thinking like the world thinks. The unstoppable church does not receive rewards from their master like the world doles out rewards. Because that first guy, he would have been, and the second guy, 10 versus 4? Seriously? Quit counting like the world counts. God doesn't count that way. The issue was motive and why you did what you did. I did this for you. I worked this gift for you. You gave me this gift. I worked it for you. Well done. You were good. You were faithful. Man, I love that. I'll spend so much more time in that next week. But this last character captures our attention. Verse 24. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. Now, what a contrast. Oh my. How's good and faithful? Now try wicked and slothful. Well, that'll get your attention. It's supposed to. What did he do that renders him in God's eyes when the master's assessment is given that is wicked and slothful? Slothful is the $20 word for lazy. Wicked. I don't need to explain that one to you. Think opposite of good. Wicked and lazy. You wicked, lazy servant. What did he do, or what did he fail to do, or what was in his mind in the context of what was going on here? You wicked, slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. Now here's the challenge to the interpretation of this passage, because I missed it, I think, the first multiple times that I read it. The key to interpreting what this guy did not do or did do is that question mark at the end of that verse. You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gathered where I scattered no seed? Question mark. This is not the master acknowledging that's who he is. He is not acknowledging that. He's pushing the question back on this wicked servant because that was his excuse for burying what was entrusted to him. I knew you, God, to be hard. You're basically a thief, God. You sow where you do not reap. That's a thief. You harvest where you do not plant. That's a thief. So he looks at God and he begins to make an assessment of his understanding of God. Now, how's your understanding of God? Do you think he has the right to do what he says he's going to do here? And God calls him on his bluff because that was his excuse. And the call is, listen, if that's what you thought of me, if you really thought I was hard, you would have taken my money and put it in the bank. The challenge was, if he takes his money and he puts it in the bank, the master would have gotten interest. And it would have been the master's money. It would have been registered in the name not of the slave, but of the master. And if that's all he wanted, the master could have done that before he left. This guy's up to something, and it's bad. And what he's giving here is an excuse, because he wanted what the master gave him for himself, hoping that the master was not coming back. He took what was entrusted to him, buried it where only he knew where it was, because had he registered it at the bank, it would have been known as his. And when the master's a long time in coming, at some point, retirement, he's going to take it all and use it for himself. Ooh, but it wasn't yours. It was his. And you took it. And you thought, with no faith, he's not coming back. And I get to do with it what I want. Now mark through these in your mind because they're all here. He lies about God. Do you know God? Is God a God who takes where he does not give? Who reaps where he does not sow? Oh my goodness, all through Scripture, God talks about how he calls and he gives and he sows and he calls and he pleads and he asks and he begs and he sows some more. Isaiah 66, I will also choose harsh treatment for them and bring their fears upon them, because when I called, no one answered. And when I spoke, they did not listen, but they did what was evil in my eyes, and they chose that in which I did not delight. We worship a God who gives and calls and calls and calls some more. Constantly. I mean, the beautiful parables about the seed, right? That's the key parable in Matthew 13. When Jesus, he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. He sowed, and some seeds fell on the path, and then he sows some more, and some falls on rocky ground, and then he sows some more seed, and then it falls among the thorns, and then some more seed falls on good ground, and it finally produces. But the thing you want to walk away with here, he is a God who sows, and he sows, and he sows some more. How many times have you had someone tell you about how good God is? Why don't you add today in? One more time. God is good, and he gives a bunch. And he waits, and he constantly gives. You're a hard man, God. You're a thief. Problem number one. Problem number two, he lies about himself. He lies about God, he lies about himself. What do you mean he lies about himself? So I was afraid. You big liar. You would have put the money in the bank if you were afraid. That's what God tells him. You're just lying. And then you think you're going to bail out in the rare chance that he's going to finally come back, and you're going to be able to say, listen, you're going to be able to say somehow, see, it's yours, take it. No harm, no foul. No harm, no foul. Harm and foul. No harm, no foul. See, he was wicked. He was a faithless thief, hoping that God wouldn't come back and ask, hoping that, quite frankly, God wouldn't come back. So here's the challenge in the parable. What did you do with his stuff? I mean that, saying you. The unstoppable church moves with an entrustment, and God will assess it. And we're all supposed to be looking forward to the day when it'll be high fives. And yeah, I don't live up to my own expectation, and I'm guessing you probably don't live up to yours. And I can hardly, if I don't live up to my own expectation, I really have a hard time living up to yours. But I'm working it for him. Are you working it for him? I mean, ask him. It's so funny how many counseling sessions I've been in where one spouse looks at another and says, I did this for you and for us. And the other one looks back and said, I didn't want that. How many times we move and we've never bothered to ask the question to God, is this for you or for me? There's the marker. Because it's so easy to just do it for you and your own and not for him. There's the marker here. And the last guy, it doesn't end well for him. I'm grateful when I finish this parable that it's a parable about an assessment and not about eternal security. But everyone belongs to God. But the church, we call him Father. Everyone calls him Creator. But the church, we call him Papa. And there's a difference. Because we know we weren't just created and we are his, but we were redeemed. We were bought back from our own mess. And now we're his twice over, if you will. Think of it that way. I made you once, and you ruined it. I'll buy you. I'll redeem you. You're mine now.
This has been a message from the chapel. Thanks for joining us today. For more information about the chapel or any of our campuses, including Akron, Greene, Wadsworth, Kenmore, Cuyahoga Falls, Nordonia, and Medina, please go to our website at thechapel.life.